Welcome to Module 1, Lesson 5, where we'll explore Interpretivism and Constructivism as important research paradigms. These approaches represent a significant departure from positivist traditions and offer alternative ways of understanding social phenomena. In this lesson, we'll examine their philosophical foundations, core principles, and methodological implications. If you decide to like this video series, be sure to visit my webpage at subthesis.com so you can find the whole course. It is my goal to ensure that you are able to perform better research with less time and energy spent trying to figure things out. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the key principles that define interpretivist and constructivist paradigms, understand how they differ from positivist approaches, and analyze how these philosophical positions influence methodological choices in research. As we progress through this material, think about how these approaches might apply to research questions in your own field. Interpretivism emerged as a response to the application of natural science methods to social inquiry. It has roots in a few different philosophical traditions. Phenomenology, developed by philosophers like Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger, focuses on examining consciousness and direct experience. Hermeneutics, originally concerned with biblical text interpretation, expanded to understand all forms of human communication and action. Symbolic interactionism emphasizes how meaning emerges through social interaction. Key figures in developing interpretivist thought include Wilhelm Dilthey, who argued for distinct methods for the human sciences, Max Weber, who introduced the concept of Verstehen, or understanding, and Alfred Schutz, who connected phenomenology to social science research. These core principles distinguish interpretivist approaches. First, interpretivists prioritize understanding over explanation, focusing on meaning rather than causation. Second, they emphasize contextual perspective, recognizing that human action can only be understood within specific cultural and historical settings. Third, interpretivists acknowledge human intentionality, viewing people as active meaning makers rather than simply responding to external forces. Fourth, they recognize multiple realities, understanding that different people construct and experience the world differently. Fifth, they take a holistic approach, examining phenomena in their entirety rather than breaking them down into isolated variables. And sixth, they view the researcher as an instrument, acknowledging that the researcher's subjective involvement is integral to the research process rather than something to be eliminated. Interpretivist and constructivist approaches are grounded in distinct ontological and epistemological assumptions. Ontologically, they reject the notion of a single objective reality, instead recognizing multiple constructed realities. From this perspective, reality is not something out there to be discovered, but is socially constructed through human interpretation and meaning-making. Epistemologically, interpretivists view knowledge as interactively co-created between researcher and participants. They reject the possibility of neutral observation, instead acknowledging that findings emerge through dialogue and interpretation. This represents a significant departure from positivist assumptions of researcher detachment and objectivity, and these philosophical assumptions translate into distinctive methodological approaches. Interpretivist research tends to be naturalistic, studying phenomena in their natural settings rather than controlled environments. It employs primarily qualitative methods and follows an inductive logic, developing understanding from specific observations rather than testing predetermined hypotheses. Key methodological features include thick description, rich, detailed accounts of context and meaning, and emergent design, allowing the research to evolve as understanding develops. Quality criteria also differ from positivist standards, focusing on trustworthiness, credibility, transferability, dependability, and authenticity rather than validity and reliability in their traditional sense. To better understand interpretivism, it's helpful to contrast it with positivist approaches. While positivism aims to explain phenomena through causal relationships, interpretivism seeks to understand them through meaning and context. Positivist research typically follows a deductive approach, testing theories against evidence, while interpretivist research is primarily inductive, developing understanding from observation. Positivists maintain detachment between researcher and subject, while interpretivists recognize interactive relationships. Positivist methods are predominantly quantitative and standardized, while interpretivist methods are qualitative and flexible. Finally, positivism seeks universal, context-free generalizations, while interpretivism emphasizes contextual understanding that may be transferable but not universally applicable. Let's explore some key branches of interpretivism. Phenomenology focuses on lived experience, aiming to describe the essence of phenomena as they appear to consciousness. Researchers bracket their assumptions to access participants' experiences directly, with variants including descriptive, interpretive, and existential approaches. Hermeneutics focuses on interpretation, particularly of texts, recognizing that understanding requires considering historical context and the interpreter's perspective. It emphasizes the hermeneutic circle, moving between parts and whole to deepen understanding, and acknowledges that interpretation is always situated in the interpreter's horizon of understanding. Symbolic interactionism examines how meaning emerges through social interaction. It emphasizes that people act toward things based on the meanings those things have for them. Meanings arise through social interaction and are modified through interpretation. This approach focuses on how people construct shared understandings through interaction. Social constructionism emphasizes how knowledge and reality are constructed through social processes, particularly language and discourse. It examines how certain understandings become institutionalized as reality and how these constructions shape social life. This approach often involves critical examination of taken for granted categories and concepts. It's important to distinguish between constructivism and social constructionism, which are sometimes confused. Constructivism, associated with Piaget and others, focuses on individual cognitive processes of knowledge construction. It examines how individuals actively build understanding through experience and reflection. Social constructionism, associated with Berger and Luckmann among others, emphasizes collective, cultural processes of reality construction. It focuses on how shared meanings emerge through social interaction and become institutionalized. Both approaches emphasize the constructed nature of knowledge, but they differ in their focus on individual versus social processes. In interpretivist research, the researcher's position is explicitly acknowledged rather than minimized. Reflexivity, critical self-awareness of one's role and influence in the research process, is essential. Researchers continuously examine how their background, assumptions, and interactions shape the research. Transparency about one's positionality, including relevant aspects of identity, background, and theoretical orientation, is crucial for ethical research and credible interpretation. Rather than claiming neutrality, interpretivist researchers acknowledge their perspective
while striving to understand others' viewpoints on their own terms.
Interpretivist assumptions lead to distinctive methodological choices. Common methods include in-depth interviews that explore participants' meanings and experiences, participant observation that engages with phenomena in natural settings, and case studies that examine particular instances in depth. Other approaches include narrative methods that explore how people make sense of experience through stories, discourse analysis that examines language and meaning, ethnography that studies cultural patterns and meanings, and visual methods that explore nonverbal forms of meaning. These approaches share a focus on depth, meaning, and context, rather than breadth and generalizability. Let's consider how positivist and interpretivist approaches might differ in health research. A positivist study might measure treatment outcomes, test hypotheses about intervention effectiveness, and use statistical comparisons to establish causal relationships between variables like treatment type and health outcomes. An interpretivist study might explore patient experiences of illness and treatment, examining meaning-making processes and how cultural contexts shape health beliefs and behaviors. Rather than seeking generalizable causes, it would aim for a rich understanding of how people experience health and illness in particular contexts. In educational research, a positivist approach might use standardized tests to measure learning outcomes, compare teaching methods to determine which produces better results, and develop models to predict student success based on various factors. An interpretivist approach might examine classroom dynamics, explore student and teacher experiences through observation and interviews, and consider how identity and power shape educational interactions. It would recognize education as a complex social process rather than a simple cause-effect relationship. Interpretivist approaches offer different strengths. They provide in-depth understanding of phenomena from participants' perspectives. They're sensitive to context, recognizing how meaning varies across settings. They offer flexibility to adapt as understanding develops, rather than following rigid predetermined procedures. They privilege participant voice, allowing people to express their experiences in their own terms. They acknowledge complexity rather than reducing phenomena to simplified variables. And they value meaning and interpretation as central to understanding human action, rather than seeing them as subjective biases to be eliminated. Interpretivist approaches also face limitations and challenges. Their focus on depth and context limits generalizability across settings. They're typically labor-intensive, requiring significant time for data collection and analysis. They face concerns about subjectivity and researcher bias that must be addressed through reflexivity and transparency. Establishing quality can be challenging without the standardized criteria used in positivist research. The research depends heavily on the researcher's interpretive skills, and interpretivism continues to face legitimacy challenges in fields dominated by positivist approaches. Despite these challenges, interpretivist approaches have found applications across diverse disciplines. In psychology, particularly qualitative and cultural approaches. In sociology, examining social meaning and interaction. In anthropology, through ethnographic methods. And in education, studying learning as a social process. They are also used in business research, particularly organizational culture studies. In healthcare, examining patient experiences and provider-patient interactions. And in information systems, studying how technology is understood and used in social contexts. These applications demonstrate interpretivism's flexibility across research domains. As we conclude, consider these reflection questions. How comfortable are you with the idea of multiple constructed realities versus a single objective reality? What challenges might you face if conducting research from an interpretivist perspective? Consider a research question you're interested in. How would it transform if approached interpretively? And finally, how might interpretivist and positivist approaches complement each other in addressing questions in your field? In our next lesson, we'll explore critical and transformative paradigms that introduce additional dimensions to research philosophy. Thank you for your attention. Thank you again for your time. If you found this video helpful, please consider liking and subscribing to see when more content pops up. In addition to this, you can check out my website, subthesis.com. There, you can find more products for sale to include whole courses that help you perform better quality research with less time and energy.